We found a scarf tied to a branch, still warm like someone had just worn it. I remember the way the forest closed around us that afternoon, the late sun spilling through bare limbs in slanting shafts of gold. It was supposed to be a simple hike, a loop through the trails outside Pine Hollow, but the deeper we went, the quieter it became. Even the birds seemed to vanish, and the wind no longer rustled the leaves. Only the soft crunch of our boots disturbed the mossy floor. Claire was ahead of me, scanning the trail. She froze abruptly. "Wait, what is that?" I looked up. There, hanging from a low branch like a forgotten flag, was a scarf. Crimson wool, frayed at the ends, twisted carefully around the limb. But the odd thing wasn't the color or placement. It was the warmth. When I reached out to touch it, my fingers brushed the fibers, and heat radiated through my palm. Not the residual warmth of the sun, but as if someone had just draped it over themselves. "Who would leave a scarf here?" I asked, pulling it slightly loose. Claire shook her head. "I don't know. It feels wrong," she said, eyes darting around. The forest seemed to tighten, as if listening to our conversation. Even the distant murmur of the creek sounded closer, heavier, like it had grown aware of our presence. I wrapped it around my neck instinctively. The warmth spread instantly, comforting at first, but something about it made my skin crawl. It carried the faint scent of smoke and copper, a trace of someone, somewhere, who shouldn't have been near us. "Maybe it's a trail?" Claire suggested. "Someone lost it?" I shook my head. "No, too deliberate. Tied like this, like it's meant to be found." The forest had shifted subtly while we argued. Branches that had leaned toward us straightened, others bent slightly as if peering. The shadows deepened, pooling in unnatural shapes. A dry crack echoed from somewhere far away, but when we spun around, the distance seemed wrong. The sound had come from the left, but the path behind us was straight and empty. We pressed on, curiosity pulling us, dread pressing at our spines. Every step made the air heavier, damp with a metallic tang. I kept glancing at the scarf. The fibers seemed to twitch against my neck, almost quivering, though the wind had died entirely. At times I thought I heard whispering, soft, human, almost friendly, but impossible to localize. "It's like it's aware," I whispered. Claire shivered. "You mean the scarf?" "Everything here," I said. "The air, the shadows, it's watching us." We came upon a shallow clearing. The light was strange, thicker, golden but muted, like someone had poured amber through a sieve. The scarf felt warmer against my throat. I thought I saw movement just beyond the tree line, a figure, or maybe a shadow, slipping between trunks. My pulse thudded. "Did you see that?" I asked, heart hammering. Claire shook her head. "I thought I did." The forest seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. The clearing felt both smaller and infinitely large, the trunks farther apart than they should have been, yet impossibly tall. The ground shifted subtly underfoot, soft in some spots, unnaturally firm in others. I realized the forest wasn't just observing, it was shaping itself around us. We circled, looking for traces of whoever might have left the scarf. A few broken twigs, faint footprints in the moss, too shallow, almost indistinct. It was like the forest erased and replaced evidence at will. Every noise was amplified or swallowed, every shadow elongated. I rubbed my eyes. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light," I said, but the warmth against my throat contradicted me. Claire's voice was tight. "Or maybe it's bait. Something wants us to follow." I froze. The thought had crossed my mind. The warmth wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like a lure, a heartbeat at the edge of perception. I reached up instinctively, the scarf's fibers almost resisting my touch, as if alive. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed, though the sun barely moved. Every time we tried to trace our steps, the trail warped. Distances lengthened and shortened. A branch we had passed earlier now jutted across the path differently, and the creek, which should have curved left, ran straight for a few steps before vanishing under the trees. We stopped near a gnarled oak, and I noticed the scarf twitch again. A shadow passed across the clearing, a shape that was neither fully human nor fully tree. It mimicked our movements just beyond the periphery of sight, bending, twisting. When I turned, nothing was there. When I looked away, it lingered, mocking me with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. The warmth on my neck was suffocating now. I tried to remove the scarf, but it clung stubbornly, pulling slightly, as if tugging me forward. I yanked, and the fibers stretched impossibly, almost elongating before slipping off, landing gently at my feet, still warm. "Take it off," Claire said, voice low. I picked it up. The edges frayed, but the heat remained, unnaturally steady. I realized then it wasn't the scarf that was dangerous. It was the presence tied to it. Someone or something had been here recently, or maybe never. The lines blurred. The forest shifted again. Light distorted, the trunks elongating, twisting, as if breathing. A whisper carried through the air. "Come closer." Not spoken aloud, but pressed against the inside of my skull. The shadows of trees leaned, not swaying naturally, but peering, reaching. We moved forward cautiously. Every step felt observed. The scarf's warmth followed me even when it lay on the ground. I imagined a figure just beyond the trees, a mimic, a watcher. Our own reflections in puddles seemed slightly delayed, movements ever so wrong. When I blinked, I thought I caught faces in the bark. Human, familiar, yet wrong. We stumbled upon another clearing. This one was circular, unnatural, the trees impossibly tall, converging toward an unseen point above. The scarf twitched at the edge of my vision. Then it moved, rising slightly as if lifted by an invisible hand, turning toward the shadowed treeline. A sound came, low and resonant, like laughter and breathing fused, pressing into our chests. "Let's leave," Claire whispered, gripping my sleeve. I nodded, heart pounding, but the trail had changed. Paths we had just walked were now impossible to recognize. Every tree seemed aligned differently, taller, wider, denser. The scarf pulsed faintly at my feet, warm enough to make me step back instinctively. We ran, or tried to. Each step was heavier, the forest resisting subtly, the shadows leaning closer, shapes mimicking us, staying just beyond clear sight. I could feel it, the presence, the owner of the scarf, whatever it was, tracking me, amused, patient. We reached what appeared to be the trailhead. Light outside the trees, the road, safety, or a semblance of it. I glanced down. The scarf lay neatly across my boot, impossibly warm, though we had left it behind moments ago. My fingers brushed it. Heat spread instantly. I realized then that the forest hadn't released it. It hadn't released me. Claire didn't notice at first, distracted by the road. I tucked the scarf in my pack, but its warmth pressed against my chest, insistent. I could feel eyes everywhere, in the trees, in the air. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision, always just beyond clarity. That night, back home, I swore I felt it, subtle at first, warmth rising through my collar, a whisper brushing my ear. When I turned, nothing was there. Yet a faint scent lingered, smoke, copper, the echo of someone who should not exist. I knew the forest had marked me. The scarf, the warmth, the presence, it followed. I could not shake it, and I feared that every shadow, every soft movement in the corner of my vision, every impossibly warm breeze would carry a reminder that the watcher was still out there, waiting, patient. And somewhere, deep in the woods, the scarf hung again, tied neatly to a branch, still warm, still waiting for the next set of footsteps. Something whispered our names from inside the moss. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the wind, a soft, deliberate sound that slithered over the ground, brushing against my boots as I stepped over thick mats of moss covering the roots of ancient pines. Jonah was ahead of me, cutting a path through the undergrowth, and I hesitated. The forest was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and leaves you hyper-aware of every snap of twig or rustle of leaves. "Did you hear that?" I called, voice barely above a murmur. Jonah stopped and turned slowly. His face was calm, almost too calm. Hear what? I pointed to the moss at my feet. It said, my name. He chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Don't start. Moss doesn't talk. I knelt down, brushing a hand over the green carpet. Damp, soft, dense. It pressed slightly under my palm, pliant like skin, but with a chill that seemed unnatural. And then again, faintly, almost imperceptibly, Alex, Alex. I jerked my hand back. It's whispering. Jonah frowned. Whispering. He crouched beside me, squinting. You've been staring at the ground too long. It's probably a trick of the wind, moss shifting. But the sound returned, stronger now, threading through the damp undergrowth. Jonah, Alex, Jonah. I froze. The voice wasn't carried on the wind. It came from below, from inside the earth itself. It mimicked the tone of my voice, then Jonah's almost perfectly. My stomach twisted. It knows our names. Jonah's laugh had vanished. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked nervously around the shadows between the trees. It can't know our names, he said. This is just. The words died on his lips. We continued, trying to convince ourselves that we were imagining it. Every step over the moss made a subtle, wet squish underfoot, like the forest itself was breathing through the ground. Branches hung low, their tips brushing our faces as if guiding us, directing us deeper into the shadowed heart of the woods. By the time the sun dipped low, the moss had thickened, covering not only roots but rocks, fallen logs, even patches of soil between tree trunks. The whispers returned intermittently, delicate at first, mimicking casual conversation, then sharper. Alex, Jonah, follow. We stopped again. Are we going insane? Jonah whispered. I don't know, I admitted. The moss beneath me quivered subtly. The whispers intensified for a heartbeat, overlapping, layering over each other until I could no longer tell whose voice it had been or whether it was real. It felt like the forest was speaking directly into my mind. We pressed onward, but the trail seemed to stretch unnaturally. Distances warped. A tree that should have been 50 feet ahead now appeared 100, and then collapsed inward again when I blinked. Shadows lengthened in impossible directions. The sound of our own movement bounced back from nowhere, delayed, distorted. Each squish of our boots on moss reverberated like a footstep from far away, but we were alone. At one point, Jonah knelt and touched a patch of moss, pale green and spongy. Look at this, he said. I crouched beside him. The moss twitched beneath our hands, faintly, as though something was moving just below the surface. And then the voice, Jonah, Alex, don't leave. He recoiled. It's inside the moss, like it's alive. I swallowed hard. Alive or pretending to be us? The thought made me shiver. The whispers began to imitate not just our voices but fragments of conversation we had shared earlier. Things we had said quietly, almost forgetting. The moss repeated them, mocking, echoing back with subtle distortions. I realized the forest was studying us, learning us. The names, the speech patterns, the hesitations. Darkness fell fully. The forest floor, once mottled with sunlight, now appeared almost black, the moss glowing faintly in an unnatural green luminescence, as if the earth itself had been suffused with some sentient essence. The voices became more insistent, forming a chorus around us, circling. Alex, Jonah, Alex, Jonah, follow, stay here. We tried to leave. Each step forward was met with a subtle resistance, the forest seeming to contract around us. Roots lifted, twisted, forming barriers we hadn't noticed moments before. Branches swayed against the direction of the wind. Every sound, every shadow, carried the sense of an unseen presence just beneath the moss, watching, waiting. Jonah stumbled and cursed. When he tried to climb over a fallen tree, the moss on its surface rippled, quivering under his touch. Then a soft hiss. Jonah, it's cold, cold. The sound wasn't in his voice, it was in mine too. We both flinched. I think it can get inside our heads, I said. My hands pressed to my temples. It's not just imitating us, it's learning us. The whispers began to escalate, layering over our own breathing. Alex, Jonah, Alex, Jonah, leave, stay. Every syllable felt like a finger tracing my spine. I realized we weren't walking in the forest, it was guiding us, manipulating distances, light, sound. Each patch of moss quivered beneath invisible weight, alive and aware. Jonah grabbed my arm. We have to get out. I nodded, though the trail behind us had shifted again. I could no longer tell which direction led back to the edge. Each step seemed longer, heavier. The moss beneath our boots pressed upward in strange pulses, faintly warm, as if alive. A figure, barely visible, rose from the ground for a heartbeat, then vanished into the shadows. We stumbled into a small clearing. The moss glowed faintly around a central root cluster, curling like fingers. I knelt and touched it. The whispers surged, urgent, intimate. Alex, closer. Jonah, closer. The voice perfectly mimicked my own tone. My chest tightened. It knew how I breathed, how I spoke, even my hesitations. Jonah pulled me back. Don't. Too late. A patch of moss shivered violently beneath me, and I felt something wrap around my wrist. A cold, pliant grip. The whispering turned sharp, demanding, stay. Don't leave. Alex, Jonah, stay. I yanked free, but the warmth or cold, I couldn't tell, lingered, as if a part of the moss had embedded itself inside me. Every step I took after that felt heavier, like the forest was tugging at my mind. The whispering continued in soft, mocking tones, echoing fragments of my own voice. We ran blindly, branches slapping our faces, moss squishing underfoot. I couldn't tell how long we moved. Time seemed to stretch and compress. Eventually, we broke from the densest part of the forest. The sounds of civilization, traffic, distant voices were muted, almost dreamlike. I glanced behind me. The forest looked ordinary from the edge, sun striking the tops of trees, shadows lengthening naturally. But I knew better. I could still feel the pulse under my skin, the whispers in the corners of my mind, faint and insistent. At night, back home, I could hear it again, soft and patient. Alex, not outside, not in the room, but beneath my feet, inside the floorboards, in the pressure of my own chest. I realized, with a cold certainty, that the forest had marked me. Whatever had whispered my name, whatever had learned it, had followed. And the moss, the living, sentient ground of those woods, would never let me forget. I feel it even now, in the quiet moments, curling at the edges of my thoughts, waiting. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the moss waits too, alive, aware, whispering for the next set of names.